So in this video segment, we're just going to wrap up everything that we've been talking about in the virtualization series, particularly around applications, and just talk through some ideas and best practices for protecting virtualized applications. So number one, the agents and guests. For the high transaction VMs, that's what you want to do. Also realize if you're doing like SQL Always On, you're doing Exchange DAG, the agents and the guests give you the best visibility and the most options to be able to back up and recover that data. Also consider the multi-stream capabilities, and also consider the aspect of that granularity that the agent and the guest is going to provide for you. The VSS quiesce, and that's something else that we talked about, is that when VSS quiesces, it quiets down the disks, does the VSS snapshot, and if there's any VSS aware applications, it will also attempt to snap those as well. Caution on just expecting that to work. If it's a low transaction VM, you might get away with it, but consider the difference between that and application aware is with the VSS quiesce only, we rely on VMware tools to be able to guarantee that the quiesce of the application occurred. That never gets reported back to us, and we don't sit there and wait for it to occur. Whereas the application aware VSA backup, there's going to be that guarantee that the application properly quiesced, and also with the application aware, we have the ability to do that agent level restore. All right. For SQL databases with the application aware, we also, since the plugin is getting put on the virtual machine, we'll also do the automatic log backup. So there is more flexibility in that. We also talked about IntelliSnap for VSA, and that goes a long way to solve the issues with the redo logs piling up and the software snapshot issues. So if you are using application aware for medium to high transaction applications running on a virtual machine, IntelliSnap is going to be a much better option than doing streaming backups. The other two things I want to talk about here is the database dumps and the freeze thaw scripts. So first, let's talk about the database dumps. And it's kind of interesting because more than likely with the majority of VMs, it's probably what you're doing, or what the database administrators are doing. And despite all these different options that Commvault gives you as far as being able to protect application data, a good majority of DBAs are just going to dump out databases, and you're just going to go and back them up. And I've had many conversations with people about this, and I would often joke that, you know, the politics of dealing with different people within your business is beyond scope of any courses that we teach. But if the DBAs are dumping out the databases, and by the way, there's a big difference between a 200 gig SQL database and a 20 terabyte Oracle database. So obviously we're not talking, you know, this is across the board type of thing. But a lot of DBAs are just going to dump out the databases. What you have with the database dump is an application consistent point in time dump of that database. What that means is, outside of the issue of high transaction VMs piling up in your, the transactions in your redo logs, you have your application consistent dump right there. So in a way, it doesn't matter what state the virtual machine is backed up in, as long as it's OS consistent, VSS properly engaged. If you need to restore that VM and the application doesn't come back up online, the DBAs could just go and restore the database from the dumps, right? That ties in also to freeze thaw scripts, and this is something that I'm going to say is not as common, but in some cases it has to be done this way. And the example I'm going to use is I'm going to use an application, whatever application you want, that runs across multiple machines, whereas the application itself needs to be shut down in a proper state before you can do a consistent backup of it. In that particular case, you could use freeze thaw scripts, where freeze, I'm going to bring the application down, and then I'm going to go ahead and do the backups, and then I'll bring it back up online once the backup is done. And there's a couple ways that you can do this with Commvault software. Number one, you could use pre-post processes. That gets a little tricky because you got to make sure if you're executing scripts on VSA proxies, those scripts, either you have to specifically define which proxies are going to back up that subclient, or you got to make sure the scripts exist on all of the proxies. The other option is you could use workflows. And the nice thing about workflow is if you're going to use a particular script, the script could be put inside the workflow itself. So the script is not living on the proxies. when the backup goes to execute via the workflow will go and inject the script where it needs to go, execute it, and then delete the script. So by centrally managing that script, whenever you need to update it, you update it in one spot, knowing that it gets deployed out at runtime. The third option is, and this would apply for database dumps too, because I'm going to come back to that to finalize this segment, is instead of you scheduling or running the backups via the COMSOL console or the admin console, you actually save the job as a script. You give it to the application owner. They go ahead, they do whatever scripting they need to do, bring down the application or do the dump, and then call the backup to go and do the backup. All right? So that could be done for the freeze-thaw scripts. Part of that process in their scripting could be calling the backup. Or a database dump, in the case that if they're going to dump out a database, you want to make sure that dump completes successfully before you actually execute the backup. And there's two reasons for this. Number one, if it's in the middle of dumping out a database and you run your backup, as soon as the software snapshot occurs, let's say you're 50% into dumping out that database, you now have a 50% database file, which is going to be useless to you upon restore. The second problem with that is once the snapshot occurs, the rest of that database is still being dumped out. And if it's going to the same disks, which surprisingly a lot of DBAs do that, they just put their database dumps to a different disk on the same machine. People do strange things. All of those transactions, all of those writes are going into your redo logs. And that's going to cause the VM snapshot to blow up on you, which could cause problems once the VM backup is complete and you have to replay the redo logs. And in worst case scenarios, it could also cause your data store to run out of space. So when it comes to protecting applications, you really need to think about what is the best way to go. Communicate with the virtualization guys if you are not that person. Communicate with the database administrators and try to put together a comprehensive plan, because all things here are not created equal. One of the great things about Commvault software is that we give you all these options.